It was a quiet evening when Monica Harris, a highly respected FBI agent, stopped by a small convenience store on her way home. Dressed in casual jeans and a hoodie, she looked like any other customer picking up a few items after a long day. She grabbed a bottle of water and a protein bar, then walked toward the checkout line. As she stood waiting, she noticed a police officer outside, watching through the store's glass doors. He seemed to be paying extra attention to her, but Monica brushed it off. Being in law enforcement herself, she was used to observing people. Maybe he was just doing his job. However, as soon as she stepped outside with her bag in hand, the officer approached her. "Hold on a second," he said, blocking her path. Monica stopped, raising an eyebrow. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. The officer, whose badge read Greg Lawson, crossed his arms. "We got a report about a suspicious person matching your description. Mind telling me what you're doing here?" Monica frowned slightly. She had just walked out of a store like any other customer. What exactly made her suspicious? Still, she remained professional. "I just bought a few things," she said, holding up the small bag with her receipt. Lawson didn't look convinced. "Where's your ID?" he demanded. Monica was taken aback. She had done nothing wrong, and now she was being treated like a suspect. She reached into her bag slowly and pulled out her wallet. "I don't see why you need my ID," she said, keeping her tone steady. "But here you go." Lawson barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "This doesn't prove anything. I need you to come with me for questioning." Now Monica felt a wave of frustration. She had spent years enforcing the law the right way, and now she was being treated unfairly. She knew her rights. "Officer, I don't think this is necessary. If you check my ID properly, you'll see." "Enough," Lawson interrupted, his tone sharp. "Turn around." Before Monica could say another word, he grabbed her wrist and pulled out his handcuffs. The small crowd around the store watched in shock. A woman gasped. Someone else muttered, "What's going on?" Monica could feel the cold metal snap around her wrists. Her heart pounded, but she kept her face calm. She had been trained to handle pressure. Still, this was different. This wasn't an operation, and she wasn't undercover. She was being arrested for absolutely nothing. A few people pulled out their phones to record as Lawson led her toward his patrol car. Monica took a deep breath. She knew one thing for sure. This officer had just made the biggest mistake of his career, and soon he was going to realize exactly who he had arrested. The police car moved through the city streets as Monica sat in the back, her hands still cuffed behind her. She looked out the window, her mind racing. The whole situation felt unreal. She had spent years serving the country, enforcing the law, and ensuring justice. But now she was the one being treated like a criminal, for no reason at all. Officer Lawson sat in the front, occasionally glancing at her through the rearview mirror. His partner, Officer Ryan Tate, sat beside him, silent. Unlike Lawson, Tate didn't seem as aggressive. In fact, he looked a little uncomfortable, as if he wasn't sure they were doing the right thing. But he said nothing. Monica knew she had two choices. She could argue, demand to be released, and make things worse, or she could stay calm and wait for the right moment. She chose the second option. The car pulled into the police station, and Lawson parked near the entrance. He stepped out, opened the back door, and roughly pulled Monica out. She didn't resist. Instead, she looked at him directly and said in a steady voice, "You're making a big mistake, officer." Lawson smirked. "Yeah, we'll see about that." Inside the station, a few officers looked up as Lawson led Monica past the front desk. Some of them exchanged confused glances. It wasn't every day that a woman in casual clothes, who didn't seem the least bit afraid, was brought in like this. Booking her for questioning, Lawson told the officer at the desk. "For what charge?" the officer asked, frowning. Lawson hesitated for a second, then said, "Suspicious activity." The officer at the desk looked skeptical, but nodded and wrote something down. Monica said nothing. She just observed everything, noting every face, every reaction. Some officers looked indifferent, while others seemed unsure. But no one spoke up. Lawson and Tate took her to a small holding cell at the back of the station. The cell had metal bars and a simple bench against the wall. Lawson unlocked the door and gestured for Monica to step inside. "Sit tight," he said. "We'll deal with you soon." As the door clanked shut, Monica finally allowed herself to sigh. She wasn't scared. She had faced far worse in her career. But what bothered her was the injustice. She had done absolutely nothing wrong, yet here she was, locked up like a criminal. Minutes passed, then an hour. No one came to question her. No one checked her ID properly. It was as if they had forgotten about her. But Monica knew something they didn't. She wasn't just sitting there, waiting. She was watching, learning, planning. And soon, everything was going to change. Time passed slowly in the small holding cell. Monica sat on the hard bench, her hands resting on her lap, her mind completely focused. She had been in dangerous situations before. Undercover missions, high-stakes investigations, and intense interrogations. But this moment felt different. This wasn't a mission. This was real, and it was happening to her. Outside the cell, officers moved around the station, laughing, talking, and carrying on with their regular routines. But Monica noticed something interesting. Some of them were glancing at her through the bars, their expressions unsure. They didn't know who she was, but something about her calmness made them uneasy. Most people in this situation would be panicked, yelling or begging to be released. But she wasn't. Finally, after what felt like forever, the door to the holding area swung open. A man in his 50s with graying hair and a stern expression walked in. His uniform was crisp, and his badge read Captain James Reynolds. He stopped in front of the cell and narrowed his eyes at Monica. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice wasn't harsh, but it held authority. Monica stood up slowly. "I've been trying to tell your officers that for hours," she said. "My name is Special Agent Monica Harris, FBI." There was a moment of silence. One of the younger officers in the room shifted uncomfortably. Lawson, who had been standing nearby with his arms crossed, scoffed. "Yeah, right," he muttered. Captain Reynolds, however, didn't dismiss her claim so easily. He studied her face for a long moment before turning to another officer. "Check her ID. Now." The officer rushed off while the room remained tense. Monica didn't say another word. She simply held Captain Reynolds' gaze, watching as his confidence slowly started to waver. A few minutes later, the officer returned, holding a file. He looked nervous. "Sir, we ran her name and fingerprints." He swallowed hard before continuing. "She's telling the truth. She's a federal agent." The entire room fell silent. Reynolds took the file and flipped through it quickly. His expression darkened as he read. "Lawson," he said in a dangerously calm voice, "tell me you verified her identity before bringing her in." Lawson's face turned pale. She didn't show me any proof," he stammered. "She was acting suspicious." "She showed you her ID," Monica interrupted. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were sharp. "You ignored it." Captain Reynolds let out a slow breath, clearly furious. He turned to another officer. "Get those cuffs off her. Now." An officer rushed to unlock the cell and remove the handcuffs. Monica rubbed her wrists but didn't look relieved. Instead, she remained completely composed, her eyes still fixed on Lawson. He had made a mistake, and now he was about to face the consequences. The moment Monica's handcuffs were removed, she slowly stretched her wrists, feeling the stiffness from being restrained for so long. But she wasn't focused on that. She was watching the room, observing every reaction. Captain Reynolds turned to Lawson, his expression tight with anger. "You arrested an FBI agent without cause?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Lawson shifted uncomfortably. She was acting suspicious. I was just doing my job." Monica took a step forward. "Your job," she said, her tone cool but firm. Your job is to enforce the law, not abuse it. Lawson's face reddened, but before he could speak, Monica pulled out her phone from her pocket. She tapped the screen a few times and then turned it around for everyone to see. The room went silent. The screen showed a video recording. The moment Lawson stopped her outside the store, the way he ignored her ID, the way he handcuffed her without reason. The entire conversation, every word, every action, all recorded. I started recording the moment you approached me, Monica said. I sent a copy to my FBI team and my attorney the second you put me in cuffs. Lawson's eyes widened in panic. You can't do that. Monica raised an eyebrow. Oh, you think I don't know my rights? She stepped closer, her voice calm but powerful. You didn't just arrest an innocent person, Lawson. You violated my rights. And now, the whole world is going to know about it. A few officers exchanged uneasy glances. They knew this was serious. Some of them had already seen the video circulating online. Monica had made sure it reached the right people. Captain Reynolds clenched his jaw. Officer Lawson, hand me your badge and gun. Lawson's mouth fell open. Wait, what? You heard me, Reynolds said, his tone sharp. You're being placed on immediate suspension pending an internal investigation. Lawson looked around, as if expecting someone to defend him. But no one spoke. Even his partner, Officer Tate, remained silent. Slowly, Lawson removed his badge and gun, placing them on the captain's desk. His hands were shaking. Monica didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply met Lawson's eyes and said, "Next time, remember, power doesn't make you right." Reynolds turned to Monica. Agent Harris, I sincerely apologize for this mess. I assure you, we'll take full responsibility. Monica gave a small nod. Good, because this isn't just about me. This is about every person you've treated unfairly before. With that, she turned and walked out of the precinct, her head held high. She wasn't just leaving, she was taking control. And this was just the beginning. The moment Monica stepped out of the police station, she took a deep breath of the cool evening air, but she wasn't relieved. Not yet. This wasn't over. She knew what came next. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw dozens of missed calls and messages from fellow FBI agents, reporters, and civil rights lawyers. The video she had recorded was already going viral, spreading across social media like wildfire. People were outraged. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story. Headlines flashed across the internet. FBI agent wrongfully arrested. Officer under investigation. Shocking video exposes police misconduct. By the next morning, the police station was surrounded by reporters and angry protesters holding signs demanding justice. People chanted outside, calling for an end to wrongful arrests and abuse of power. Inside the station, the atmosphere was tense. Officers whispered among themselves, watching as their department became the center of a national scandal. Some of them had known about Lawson's aggressive behavior for years, but had stayed silent. Now, they were realizing that silence had consequences. Captain Reynolds sat in his office, rubbing his temples as he watched the news play on his computer screen. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a disaster. Just then, an officer knocked on his door. "Sir, the FBI has sent a team. They want a full report." Reynolds sighed. He had expected this. Bring them in. A few minutes later, 3 FBI agents walked into the office. One of them was Monica Harris. She stood tall, her eyes steady. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for justice. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Agent Harris, I want to personally apologize again for what happened. This was unacceptable." Monica nodded. "Apologies are words. I'm here for action." She placed a file on his desk. "This is a request for a full internal investigation into Officer Lawson's past cases." Reynolds hesitated, then picked up the file. He knew there was no way out of this. The whole country was watching. "We'll cooperate," he said. Monica didn't smile. She simply said, "Good. Because the truth is coming out, whether you like it or not." Meanwhile, Lawson sat at home, staring at his phone. Every news channel was talking about him. His face was everywhere. His past actions were being exposed. People were coming forward, sharing their own stories about how he had mistreated them. He had thought he had power. Now he was losing everything. Monica watched it all unfold, but she wasn't celebrating. This wasn't just about one officer. This was about fixing a broken system. And she was just getting started. The news about Monica's wrongful arrest spread like wildfire. Television channels, newspapers, and social media were filled with discussions about police misconduct. People from different backgrounds came forward with their own experiences, sharing how they had been treated unfairly by certain officers. Inside the police station, the atmosphere was tense. Officers who had once ignored complaints against Lawson were now worried. Some of them had turned a blind eye to his actions, but now they were afraid they would also be held responsible. Monica sat in a meeting room at the FBI office, surrounded by senior agents. They were reviewing the internal investigation report on Lawson. As expected, the results were shocking. "This isn't just about your arrest," said one of her colleagues, flipping through the report. "Lawson has been involved in multiple complaints over the years. Unlawful stops, aggressive behavior, and ignoring proper procedures. But every time, the cases were either buried or dismissed due to lack of evidence." Monica shook her head. "He got away with it because no one challenged him. But this time, the whole world is watching." The FBI had already issued an official statement condemning the arrest and promising to ensure justice was served. But Monica knew statements weren't enough. Action was needed. Later that day, she received a phone call from a well-known civil rights attorney who had seen her story. "Agent Harris," the voice on the phone said, "we have received messages from over a dozen people who claim they were wrongfully arrested by Lawson in the past. They want to file a lawsuit against the department." Monica's grip on the phone tightened. "I'll do everything I can to help them," she promised. Meanwhile, at the police station, Captain Reynolds had no choice but to take action. Under pressure from the public and the FBI, he officially terminated Officer Lawson from the force. When Lawson was called into the office and handed his dismissal papers, he was in shock. "You can't do this to me," he protested. "I was just doing my job." Reynolds gave him a long, hard look. "No, you were abusing your power, and now you're facing the consequences." With his badge and gun taken away, Lawson walked out of the station for the last time. His career was over. But for Monica, the fight wasn't over yet. She wasn't just looking at one officer. She was looking at the system that allowed people like him to stay in power for so long. And she had one clear goal in mind: to make sure this never happened to anyone else again. Monica knew that getting one officer removed wasn't enough. The real issue was the system that had allowed him to stay in power for so long. She had seen the complaints against Lawson. Cases dismissed, reports ignored, and people who were too afraid to speak up. But now things were different. People were angry. They wanted change. And Monica was ready to make sure they got it. She spent the next few days meeting with victims, lawyers, and activists. The lawsuit against the police department was gaining national attention. More people came forward with their stories, not just about Lawson, but about other officers who had misused their power. Meanwhile, the police department was under pressure. The mayor and city officials were being asked tough questions. How was Lawson allowed to serve for so long? How many complaints were ignored? What changes will be made to stop this from happening again? At a press conference, Captain Reynolds stood before flashing cameras. His face was serious as he spoke into the microphone. "We take full responsibility for what happened to Agent Monica Harris," he said. "Effective immediately, we will be reviewing all past complaints against officers. Any wrongdoing will be investigated. We are committed to making sure this department serves the people fairly and justly." The reporters shouted questions, but Reynolds had said what needed to be said. The department had no choice now. They had to change. Meanwhile, Monica was invited to speak at a town hall meeting. The large room was packed with people, community members, reporters, and even some officers who wanted to listen. She stood at the front, holding the microphone, looking at the crowd. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about every person who has ever been treated unfairly. It's about those who were too scared to speak up, those who didn't have a voice. Today, we stand together to say, enough is enough." The room erupted in applause. People felt heard. They felt hope. After the meeting, several city leaders approached Monica. They wanted her help in creating new policies to ensure that complaints against officers were taken seriously. She agreed, but she also knew this was just the beginning. One officer being fired wasn't the victory. The real victory was changing the system so that officers like Lawson could never get away with this again. As Monica walked out of the meeting, her phone buzzed with another message, this time from a senator who wanted to discuss national reforms. She smiled. This fight was far from over. But for the first time, in a long time, she knew they were on the right path. A few weeks had passed since Monica's wrongful arrest, but the impact of that night was still growing stronger. The lawsuit against the police department was moving forward, and people across the country were demanding real change. Monica had been busy. She had attended meetings with lawmakers, spoken at public events, and worked closely with civil rights groups. The goal was clear: fix the system so that no one else had to go through what she did. One afternoon, she sat in a conference room in Washington, D.C., across from a group of senators and government officials. They had invited her to discuss new policies for police accountability. A senator looked at her with interest. "Agent Harris, your story has opened the eyes of many people. What do you think is the most important change we need to make?" Monica took a deep breath. She had thought about this question a lot. "We need a clear system that holds officers accountable when they break the law," she said firmly. "There should be automatic investigations when an officer is accused of misconduct. And most importantly, no more covering up complaints. Every report should be properly reviewed." The room was silent for a moment. Then the senator nodded. "I agree. We need to act now." Meanwhile, back in her city, things were already changing. The police department had introduced new training programs to teach officers about fair policing and how to handle situations properly. A special review board was created to ensure that complaints against officers were taken seriously. Even Captain Reynolds, who had once struggled with how to handle the situation, now fully supported the changes. He knew the department had made mistakes, and now they had to do better. As for Lawson, his troubles didn't end with losing his job. He was now facing legal consequences for his actions, and he realized that the power he once misused was gone forever. One evening, Monica walked through her neighborhood, watching kids play and families enjoy their time together. A woman approached her with a smile. "Agent Harris," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. My son was once stopped unfairly by the police, and we thought nothing would ever change. But because of you, things are finally different." Monica smiled warmly. "We still have a long way to go, but we're making progress. And that's what matters." She knew the fight for justice wasn't something that could be won in a single day. Real change took time. But for the first time, people weren't just talking about change. They were making it happen. And Monica Harris was proud to be part of that movement. As she looked up at the night sky, she knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning.